in from Asia as well. So it is great to see you all here. I would like to welcome you to this webinar today, where we're going to discuss about ways to strengthen the entrepreneurship and innovation ecosystem in the Pacific. My name is Zoe Victoria Tate, and I am your moderator today. I am a technical specialist for the Solomon Islands with the United Nations Capital Development Fund, and it is my pleasure to host this conversation today on a topic that I am personally very passionate about. And I look forward to working together with many of you in the Pacific region on ways to support youth, entrepreneurship, and innovation. So let me dive right in. We have 1 hour for our session today, and we're talking about strengthening the ecosystem for entrepreneurship and innovation in the Pacific. This is a key area of work under UNCDF's Pacific Digital Economy Program, which we are going to be officially launching next week. And I am hosting a fantastic panel today who is going to share their insights and experiences on this topic. I am going to first of all invite Nuria Rolbes from the International Trade Center to share some key findings from the Ecosys Entrepreneurship Ecosystem Mapping Report, which we have recently launched. And then I will continue the conversation with the panel, eventually opening to your questions, comments, and feedback as well for all of you joining us in the audience. So I am sure all of you are familiar with the Q&A function of Zoom webinars by now. It is below here in the box. So please feel free to drop your reflections in at any point. Now, before I proceed, let me first introduce the panel that we have today. We are joined by Ms. Nuria Rolbes from the International Trade Center. Good afternoon, or good morning for you, Nuria. She has been one of the key people involved in this network analysis and institutional mapping of entrepreneurship support organizations in the Pacific, and she will share more shortly. I am also joined by Ms. Haitelinisha Angilau from Tonga. Hello. She is an entrepreneur who has founded Grace Consultancy in 2020 and now already employs 4 other women. I'm also joined by Sagufta Janif from Fiji, another entrepreneur who has founded the Fusion Hub and is now also developing a job platform for freelancers. I'm joined by Jay Bartlett from the Solomon Islands, who used to be the chair of the Chamber of Commerce and has now recently joined the board of the Central Bank of Solomon Islands. And last but not least, I'm joined by Mr. Cameron Reid, who is in charge of the Pacific Private Sector Growth and Trade section of the Australian Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade. So welcome, all of you. I'm sure that you're going to share some very interesting insights. I'm looking forward to the discussion. And let's get started with the report intro. Just a little bit of background that there is already so much happening on entrepreneurship innovation in the region, which is why UNCDF decided to work together with Nuria and Zainab from the International Trade Center to map out all of these activities that are happening, right? And I would like to now invite Nuria to share a little bit more about the key findings. So Nuria, the floor is yours.
Thank you. I'll just try and share my screen. Okay, can everyone see? Okay, perfect. So thank you, Zoe, for the introduction, and hello to everyone here today, and also to my fellow panelists as well. So as mentioned, I'll just provide a very brief introduction on what you can find in the report. It's quite a thorough report, so I invite everyone to take a look. Maybe I'll just start with the methodology to clarify that this report has focused on entrepreneurship support organizations, so understanding what is the support currently provided for the entrepreneurs from different institutions. We have listed a set of all the services that are currently provided. We've identified gaps and overlaps. We've looked at the connections between those institutions. And finally, we've also listened to the entrepreneurs to understand what's their user experience when accessing those services. So I'll move directly to the key characteristics that we've seen in the Pacific ecosystem, and I'll invite you to again like read the report and go into more like the in-depth analysis of each of the countries. But what we've used here to analyze the ecosystem is a systems approach. So we know that there's like some aspects that we can see from the ecosystem, but then there are also more other aspects to it that hide behind all this. So that's why we focus on the events, patterns, and then like we've also gone through the structures and mental models of this system. So I'll start with what we can immediately see. So we've seen that there are very few information services or services provided to the entrepreneurs. And then from like those that are like actually available, they're quite scarce, but also ad hoc. So this means that are like short-term programs and then not so focused on the continuity of the journey of the entrepreneur. We've seen also that access to finance is rare and expensive for entrepreneurs, and that there's very low communication between the institutions that provide support to entrepreneurs. Also, those institutions do not have the same vision in some cases and where the ecosystem should evolve as a whole. We've also seen that entrepreneurs overall struggle to survive with their businesses, that the lack of services also gets aggravated by the fact that there's like several climate disasters and also like in some cases a challenging political environment. And then we've also seen that in terms of the structures, digital and IT and as well as infrastructure is at a nascent stage in most of the ecosystems. And then also related to the lack of services as well and the ad hoc services, we've seen that the programming approach is not at a long term, which means that overall entrepreneurs get only support at a certain stage of their progress, but not throughout their journey. We've also seen that in terms of structures, policy and regulatory environment for entrepreneurship is not there yet, or it's very weak in some cases. And then we've also seen that all these different factors come up, or let's say end up in creating like some mental models, such as the fact that entrepreneurship in some cases is not seen particularly positive or as something aspirational, that that entrepreneurship is seen more as micro entrepreneurship instead of like innovation and disruption. And then also there's a donor-driven mindset in some cases, which means that some of these programs are not fully contextualized to the local situation. So I'll invite you to read the report for more details on that, but I'll move into the recommendations. So in the recommendations, we've included short-term interventions, medium-term, and long-term, which means that short-term are like immediate actions that stakeholders in the entrepreneurship ecosystem can start taking action on. And we've also focused on three main areas, let's say, of development for this ecosystem. The first one is to build a pipeline of entrepreneurs, of new startups, then strengthen the base of the existing entrepreneurs in the ecosystem, and then start planning for further support on the growth stage of the entrepreneurship journey. So I'll just focus on the short term here since we don't have much time today. But as an example, in building the pipeline of entrepreneurs and new startups, we've recommended to raise awareness on entrepreneurship, to build a complete pathway for entrepreneurs to understand where can they go at each stage of their business development, and then to also build like stronger incubation programs to build this base and this pipeline of entrepreneurs. To strengthen the base of the support and supporting the existing entrepreneurs, we've recommended to consider some cross-cutting elements such as like social enterprise, tech entrepreneurship, and digital entrepreneurship as one, to make sure that all entrepreneurs that are currently only a few have access to all the services that are available out there. Also to build their digital capacity of the existing entrepreneurs, and also training and connecting the different entrepreneurship support organizations so that they can build together and co-create better services. And And finally, in order to start building this pipeline of like growth stage entrepreneurs, we've recommended also to build stronger mentoring and coaching programs, and also invest in market testing and market access tools and training for those entrepreneurs. This is only the example of the short-term recommendations and a very brief overview. You can also find medium-term and long-term recommendations in the report. But maybe now, before the end of my interventions, if I had to highlight 3 main points that the ecosystem as a whole in the Pacific can take into consideration to build the ecosystem immediately, I would say, first of all, is to build a one-stop shop where all the stakeholders can access information, and where entrepreneurs can identify exactly what institutions are providing support services in their countries. Number 2 is to define a clear step-by-step pathway of support. If I'm an entrepreneur with an idea, where do I go? If I'm an entrepreneur with an existing business, where do I go for support? Really creating this pathway of support so that all ecosystem actors can understand. And finally, on the third place, is strengthening the local entrepreneurship support organization. So making sure that all the programs, all the interventions go through the existing institutions, investing in those institutions that are currently already set up in the country to make sure that they provide better services and that they can continue in providing those services, ensuring sustainability. So I'm going to stop here. I'm going to leave the floor to this excellent set of panelists, and also to Zoe. And thank you very much for the time, and hope that everyone can get and read the report.
Thank you very much, Nuria, for sharing so much information in so little time. We all know that the mapping out the entire Pacific region, you are going to encounter, so many initiatives, so many opportunities, and also barriers, right? So for those of you in the audience who haven't managed to have a look at the report yet, it's now available on UNCDF's website. And of course, we are going to email you a copy after this event as well. So please feel free to read through. And if you have any comments, you see something interesting, please feel free to reach out to us, and we'd be happy to discuss that further. And now, without further delay, let me kick off this panel further. And in line with today's topic, I would like to start with our entrepreneurs first. So let me first pass the floor to Haitelenisha, also known as Sia. Sia, maybe you would like to start by responding to some of the things that Nuria has just highlighted about the opportunities and the barriers that we see. What has been your experience?
Thank you, Zoe. First off, as Zoe had mentioned, my name is Haitelenisha Milao, Malolele from Tonga. For short, I go by Sia. I run a little business called Grace Consultancy. And I know Zoe had said it's from 2020, but I had started it in 2016. So Grace Consultancy was established when I resigned my full-time job to become a full-time mother, raising my daughter at the same time. So the business and my daughter share the same name and years of life. But we offer a variety of services and partner with a lot of NGOs, private sector, the government, parliament, and many others as part of our services in communications and writing and all that. But to come back to what you had mentioned, Zoe, I fully agree with all that Nuria had said, because the challenges that I have personally faced were all that was mentioned. She just beautifully summed up all of the experiences. The ad hoc services, the lack of access to finance, being perceived as just micro entrepreneurship, and the need. I wish. I thought when Nuria was presenting, I thought, man, Nuria, if only I had met you and read this, if someone had studied before I started business, it would have helped me so much, to have a one-stop shop to have a pathway of support and to strengthen the ecosystem. That would have helped me so much. We've managed, we've had our ups and downs as a business, but and being a broke mother, but I think we've been strengthened by those challenges, and it has made us who we are now as a business, and for me as a mother and also as an entrepreneur. I think that's what I wanted to add on. Thank you, Zoe.
Thank you so much for sharing, Sia. And let's compare your experience with that of Sagufta, who is based in Fiji. Sagufta, you've told me before that you see more initiatives around in Fiji to support entrepreneurs, but at the same time, financial access is sort of deteriorating. So would you maybe share a little bit about your experience as an entrepreneur?
Sure. Thank you, everyone. My name is Shagufta, as Zoe has mentioned, and I am from Fiji. I have my social enterprise, which is the Fusion Hub, and what we essentially are doing now is we are trying to create, I think, like what was mentioned in the report, is that entrepreneurs don't have sort of development and growth level access to support services. So what we are trying to do at Fusion Hub is to create that sort of access for entrepreneurs as well, so they have these support mechanisms to be able to sustain their businesses and grow. So thank you for the question, Zoe. I think we briefly had this discussion, and it definitely is a challenge, and not just for businesses, but I feel that entrepreneurs themselves need some certain level of financial inclusion and access to financial products as well. So I think during the pandemic, we have seen, and also mentioned in the presentation, that we have seen a rise of entrepreneurial activity, especially here in Fiji, because we have access to a lot of initiatives that have been announced by the government. And we are now seeing people just, going in and registering their own businesses. So these are, of course, there, but there are definitely some challenges. The move to the digital economy is essential to the growth of our economy in the Pacific. And I feel if we want to remain relevant and gain international market access, we need to sort of continue that trajectory. So due to the increase in the startup culture, we have seen the government come up with support mechanisms that are specifically designed for the growth of MSMEs, such as the credit guarantee schemes for loans that was taken out for these MSMEs. So these are really encouraging initiatives, but I feel like we have a long road ahead. And in my opinion, to create a conducive entrepreneurial ecosystem, we need a mix of policies, incentives, and capacity. But more importantly, we need to realize that entrepreneurs also need support mechanisms to survive, so that their individual businesses can grow and they can further create employment. Financial inclusion and access to financial products for entrepreneurs themselves, I'm not just talking about the business, but for entrepreneurs, is also very, very crucial. So I want to give you a bit of context because I've been through this, and a few weeks back, my Visa debit card was hacked into, and of course, a certain amount of money was taken out of the account as well. The bank managed to reimburse it in a few weeks, but my Visa debit card has been on hold for a month now. And this Visa debit card is linked to my website and other sort of crucial software, which requires a monthly recurring fee. And if it's not paid on time, then I lose access to everything until I get a new card. So this is an issue for digital entrepreneurs whose business is basically online and they're trading online. So that means I lose my business for a month, and losing my business for a month means I can lose my customers for a month. And getting those customers back would take me some more time as well. So, right now, I decided to look at other options to mitigate this risk from happening in the future. And of course, some banks in Fiji charge an exuberant amount of deposit to open a business bank account. So I opted to get a personal bank account with a Visa card, as this account would have been used in case of emergencies such as these as a mitigation point. And to my surprise, the 3 banks that I visited all wanted an employment contract. And it's crazy because now what I'm getting from them is that if you're not if you don't have a full-time job, or if you don't have an employment contract, and if you're an entrepreneur, then you can't have a bank account, and that to a personal bank account. So which to me sort of gave me a reflection, and I said, if it's to me and I have a good financial standing, what happens to the smaller businesses and the smaller entrepreneurs as well, who are trying to access these financial products? This sort of deters them from continuing their entrepreneurial journey as well. And I think so basically getting a credit card is also another issue, and even accessing personal loans is next to impossible. So when we talk about financial inclusion, there needs to be a separate conversation about financial inclusion for entrepreneurs themselves as people, and not just their businesses. And also another separate issue is access to payment gateways. I understand that there are initiatives around product-based marketplaces for here in Fiji specifically, but there is no sort of initiative for service-based marketplaces, which is something that I'm trying to work with my freelancer platform that Zoe mentioned in my introduction. So that sort of takes me away, and it further stagnates our potential to reach international markets. And we lose our clients to markets like Philippines and India, which we can really compete against well with, given the access to talent we have here in Fiji. So now I feel like it's not just about getting finance, which I agree is a challenge, but it is more about financial inclusion and tapping into digital opportunities, so we can all work together to grow the economy, not just in Fiji, but for the Pacific region as well. So yeah, that's a bit from me.
Thank you so much, Sagufta. And I think you are raising some really crucial points here, right? That we have to address as we look at the ecosystem as a whole. So maybe next I can invite Jay to share some insights. And I'm picking out Jay because he has previously told me that he thinks entrepreneurship and innovation is often led by the private sector and propelled by entrepreneurs, right, in the previous discussion. But now we've heard from these entrepreneurs that they do face certain barriers. So my question to you is, do you see a role for government here, right, to facilitate the journey of entrepreneurs, to create maybe a more enabling environment? And if so, what needs to happen to achieve that?
Thank you, Zoe, and hello, everyone. It's great to join you all from sunny Honiara. As Zoe's mentioned, I've been chair of the Change of Commerce for a number of years. I recently just left the role, but I'll try and share some of my insights from a change perspective, and I will be more focused on the experience you have here in songs, which I think is probably similar across other small business gardens. So just to take it back a little bit, Solomon Islands has a really narrow economic base, and it's really dependent on the extractive sector. And this has been the way it's been for a number of years. Our role on the chamber was to advocate with government, trying to look at how we could foster investment, foster growth in some of these potential growth sectors that could create employment. Solomon Islands also has a very fast, young, growing population, which is similar to other emerging economies. And so you have these narrow economic base while you have a really fast growing population. So you see entrepreneurship in the private sector has a really important role to play to create employment and address a lot of
Jay, I'm so sorry to interrupt you.
Social issues.
I think your internet is sort of coming and going a little bit, and you're breaking up a bit at times. So perhaps can I ask you to try rejoining the session, And I will move on to Cameron first and come back for the second half of your answer, if that's okay. Okay, great. Thank you, Jay. I'm sorry about that. So as Jay rejoins the session, let me move on to Cameron Reid to share a little bit more about the regional perspective, right? So DFAT has been active in this space in the region for quite some time. And I would like to ask you, Cameron, from all the different initiatives that you have supported, how have you seen governments and different stakeholders, right, across the countries in the Pacific sort of take steps towards supporting this ecosystem, and what has worked well and what can we improve?
Thanks, Zoe. Just checking that you can hear me okay. Great, fantastic. And good afternoon, everyone. Great to see the panelists and see so many people joining us today. And in particular, really great to hear from Sia and Sagufta. Always good to hear from people who are entrepreneurs themselves. And hopefully we can hear from Jay in just a sec. So as Zoe said, I'm coming to this conversation as someone who works for the Australian government, as a development partner in the region. I'm based here in Canberra. And so it's always very good to hear from those from the Pacific. And I'm approaching this from a very much a regional perspective, as Zoe said. I'd like to acknowledge the hard work of ITC and UNCTAD. So Nuria, thank you very much for giving us an overview of the report. And I may have seen an early copy, so thank you for that, but look forward to having that more widely available for those on the call. Many of the report's findings really echo Australia's own experience in terms of working with small and medium businesses and entrepreneurs in the region. I think one of the key things that I mentioned is kind of looking at the unique context of each country and approaching each country separately and mapping those ecosystems. And too often, I think we kind of try and export as development partners and the international development community export experiences from elsewhere around the world without fully recognising the unique context in the Pacific. So I think this work is a really strong addition to our understanding of the constraints and how we can be working with the Pacific. Something that both Sia and Sagufta have talked about is access to finance and financial inclusion. I think that's something that is very much a constraint and barrier for entrepreneurs. Australia has quite a lot of experience working with small and medium enterprises in the Pacific to access finances, and one experience that we've had in particular is working with Pacific to co-design a locally led financial product for the needs of entrepreneurs. So I think coming to back to that point of locally led, context-specific pieces of work. So one example of that was the menstrual health trade financing vehicle, which Australia supported, and this was developed by menstrual health enterprises in the Pacific to help finance and establish the supply chains for more affordable materials. And more affordable and reliable supplies help stabilise cash flows, which then help small businesses scale their productions and then grow. And so the most important aspect of this piece of work was that it was designed by the stakeholders and was brought together to identify a specific challenge that entrepreneurs faced, and then come up with a solution and design that solution and test that solution and pilot that solution. So this really ensured that it was developed from the ground up rather than from the top down, and ensured that it was solving the right problem in the right way. I was also asked to talk about examples where Australia has successfully supported entrepreneurs in the Pacific. So there's a few. I'll try and be quick here because I actually really want to come to the discussion, but I guess there's a range of things that we are trying to do, including increasing market access for particularly for the agricultural sector, looking at regulatory reforms for to support entrepreneurship, and that really acknowledges that there's a really strong base for private sector growth in the agricultural sector. It's also we're also working with private sector organisations to support innovation and investment. I'll come back to that in a sec. And then also working with Pacific governments, which I know, talking to Sia previously last week, kind of looking at how the enabling environment supports businesses and entrepreneurs to I guess, bring forward their good ideas and limit constraints. I'd like to acknowledge, of course, the Pacific Digital Economy Program, which is obviously supporting this work today and supporting this conversation, which is great. And that's Australia is a proud supporter of PDEP, and we look forward to that program really kicking off in full and looking at how the digital economy provides opportunities for entrepreneurs and entrepreneurial growth. And one of the key issues, one of the key issues we want to support this sort of program is because, the tyranny of distance in the Pacific is real. Lots of small island states and having the infrastructure that we've talked about and new kind of products and initiatives we think will really support that growth. I'm going to move on because I'm speaking too long, but maybe we'll kind of move to, where are some of the opportunities that we're seeing? And so, Sugufta, I think you spoke about in Fiji, in Suva, you were seeing some signs of support for entrepreneurs. And I think we're seeing those sorts of signs as well, particularly for micro, small and medium enterprises. In particular, around the kind of private sector-led business development service models like the Fiji Enterprise Engine and the Greenhouse co-working space. And so these are kind of opportunities to really support that ecosystem that we're talking about today. So how can we really enliven and support the entrepreneur ecosystem? I think we're seeing that in some countries. And then maybe some reflections around the future of maybe development partner support for entrepreneurs in the Pacific. And then I'm really keen to get to the discussion. One of the things that I found interesting about reading the report was the finding around that entrepreneurship in itself is not seen as aspirational in the Pacific. So this is also supported by some findings from our market development facility and its business accelerator work. So this suggests underlying problems with entrepreneurship ecosystem, or maybe not problems, but it suggests the context with the ecosystem. And I think that's really vital that we think about how we respond to that. And I think there's two main reasons for this. So it's the formal education curriculum. And so as a result, most students come out of school really looking for jobs rather than for starting their own businesses. And I'm keen to hear, firsthand experience from those on the panel. And also there's not that many examples of like really successful entrepreneurs and people who we can follow and that people from the Pacific can follow. So I might leave it there. Those are my kind of reflections. I really look forward to the discussion and any questions that come my way. Thanks a lot.
Thank you so much, Cameron. That was definitely true that some of the mental models that underlie, a lot of these decisions that entrepreneurs make are getting to the core of the issue, right? So perhaps let us try to hand back over to Jay. Let's see if we can hear you clearly this time, Jay.
Apologies for that. I hope you can hear me a little bit better this time. I think one of the points that I was going to raise was it's important for government to invest in infrastructure that enables the cost of business to go down, and quality infrastructure like ICT. So I think that highlights my point. But just to get back to the question, a lot of the barriers that we found from working on the chamber were structural barriers. So there needed to be a lot of legislative reforms put in place. And also the second probably big point that we found was poor infrastructure. And so investment in infrastructure that supported economic activity, that enabled a lot of, I was saying earlier that the economic base is really narrow. So we needed to promote broad-based growth and invest in a lot of these other potential sectors like tourism, agriculture, and so forth. So, government targeting the investment in infrastructure and going through legislative reforms definitely plays a big part in promoting private sector growth and entrepreneurship. So government creates those conditions, and private sector will lead. One of the things we found on the chamber was, it's important. What can governments do? And it's important that we establish a good relationship with government, as private sector, as business, to help governments design their reform agenda, to keep them informed on what laws, what legislation we need changed, updated. A lot of our laws, our tax regime is old and outdated. Our labor laws are old and outdated. A lot of these need focus of government, and the role that we played was working hard on the relationship with government, establishing a relationship that was based on shared values, on trust, on understanding, and working through that to push a lot of these the reform agenda that we believed private sector needed to promote an enabling environment, and then working through some of the gaps we found in infrastructure that would really address some of the fundamental needs that business, access to cheap energy, good roads, good connectivity through our airports and ports, and so forth. So, government has a massive role to play, but it really needs, I guess, a concerted effort between both business and government to address a lot of these barriers.
Absolutely. Thank you, Jay, so much for sharing. I think you bring out very interesting points about how entrepreneurs need to work together with the government to help create that change, right? And maybe I can ask Sia to respond a little bit to both some of the things that Jay has said, but also what Cameron mentioned about mental models and, taking that decision to one day actually become an entrepreneur. Do you recognize some of those points?
Yes, Zoe, and thank you again for the opportunity. I do recognize a lot of what they had both mentioned in government and also in dealing with development partners. One of the things, because I had thought I was just doing introductions in the beginning, but the views of entrepreneurs in Tonga, because I had been exposed to full-time employment. I've worked in the communities with civil society organizations. I worked for the United Nations in the Pacific region. So I've worked a bit in the Pacific region. I worked with government sectors in the private sector. I had a bit of experience to begin. When I started as entrepreneur, a lot of people in my community were telling me that I was wasting my time. They're like, what a waste of time and talent. What a waste of skills to come home and be a mother and start a business. What kind of business? What do you mean doing business? Go back to full-time work. So the view, even now, which is why I usually, a lot of people are surprised that I actually run a business, because I make it a point not to talk about it because of that reason of the views and also just the lack of understanding. Also, in terms of government, they could do better in addressing and communicating with the entrepreneurs. I remember when I started, because I mentioned full-time mother, because when I had started, I knew that financing was going to be a challenge. And so it was crucial for me as an entrepreneur to start really with whatever I had, which was a laptop, my house, which became my office, and also to ensure that and the skills that I had gained from full-time experience. And so it was just maneuvering that and trying to calculate the risks of business so I can be able to thrive. And I think we've been able to do that in a time when most businesses in Tonga were having a hard time. We were actually thriving. Out of all our years, we were thriving during the pandemic as a business, mostly because we provide services that most Tongans don't think to even provide. And a lot of them, they do have the skills, but they can't market themselves or market their skills because, because of maintaining good relations and just offering those services for free, which is a problem. Also, the bureaucratic processes with registration, money to finance, to self-finance, but the bureaucracy, and going from one thing to another, and just government not understanding some of our needs. For example, for me, I would go and they'll be like, okay, so what would be your business? I'll be like, I'm doing a consultancy work. I do communications, I do translations, and they're like, oh, would you get money from them? I'm like, what do you mean? That's why you start a business, to make money. And and since then I have had constant struggle because they classify me as a service, and then they see the income and they say, oh, you shouldn't be a service, you should be in professional services, so you should pay more. And then just constant going back and forth like that. So sometimes I just think, what, it's a waste of time. It's better for me to just focus on my business, focus on my ideas, and expanding the business. And even when there's help available, and I know there's a lot. I have just talked with the CEO of the Ministry of Trade and Economic Development, and she had highlighted particular challenges with the women here in Tonga, specifically the women in business. And even though they have a lot more services, the way it's communicated to us is not in a way that that's business friendly, or even to reach out to the startup businesses. You would think they have registration of businesses, they'll have your communication contacts and all that, and they would easily reach you through an email, but it doesn't happen that way. So even for me, during the COVID pandemic, when I knew very well that I can access help from government and all, I'd rather not apply and go through the whole process, because it's just a headache. And plus I felt bad because we were doing so good as a business. What more would we want from government? We can just build our own. And just to wrap up on those, I also would like to talk about the opportunities, because a lot of Tongans would like to go to like startup restaurants, startup tourism, which was targeting the international market. I feel we have a lot of opportunities here in Tonga for specialized skills. In fact, one of the reasons why I thrived in my startup years was because there was a lack of specialized skills, such as writing for me, which I did as a hobby. I did it as a hobby and wrote a blog online on social media called Ordinary Tongan Lives. Even though I did that for free and did it as a hobby, it became my biggest marketing skills for my business, which has helped me to really market my skills in a non-directive way, which really works with the Tongan community and with me, because I don't like marketing and selling up in your face kind of approach. Sorry, I know I've been going too long, Zoe, but thought I'd make up for my 2 sentences in the beginning. That's a bit I can share at this point. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sia. No, absolutely. And I think it's interesting to hear some of the underlying fears, constraints, but also the opportunities, right, that are facing entrepreneurs as they navigate through the journey. And you mentioned that there's actually an opportunity, right, for really specialized skills to really add value. And it sometimes can be difficult to sort of communicate that or be clear about what value you are creating, how you are contributing to the economy, to financial inclusion, to digitization of the population, etc. Right? So I would like to ask maybe Sagufta, maybe I can ask you. in terms of entrepreneurs actually adding value, contributing to some of the problems in the region, picking up a question from the Q&A, where one of the questions is, are there any entrepreneurs that you know in the region that are addressing such important issues such as climate change, for example?
Actually, the Fusion Hub was actually designed to address the global waste crisis, which was transforming waste into usable products like sustainable furniture, home decor pieces, and all of the other things. And eventually what we started doing is we started going into communities, training women in the different communities. And then, you know, it's sort of the same thing that you also talked about in the presentation earlier, Nuria, is the, you know, we don't want to just give them training and just go away, or a certain level of capacity or funding and then just move away. What we want to go into the communities and do is we want to go in there, provide them with the training, provide them with the resources, help them incubate that business idea, maybe form a formal sort of business like maybe a cooperative or a small startup, and then take them through, you know, market access, give them market access, give them testing access where they can test the validation of their products and ideas. And then eventually we help them with their backend or back office operations, or help them support, you know, the other functions of the businesses which they might not be technically good at. So that is the level of support that these small startups need. And yes, definitely there are up and coming social enterprises that focus more on the people and the planet rather than just profit. So for them, the businesses have a sense of purpose. It's not just about creating profits, but it's also about helping the communities and helping the environment as well. Because we see youth, especially the young people, they recognize what the problems are and they have the right solutions for it. They just need an extra sort of level of push in terms of capacity building and maybe access to finance as well, to really take their idea from just being an idea to, you know, to be a full blown solution provider. Yeah. So definitely there's a lot of potential in that area.
Yeah, thank you so much, Shagufta. I think as we're already sort of coming towards the end of the discussion, time flies when you're having fun. I would like to invite one final question for all of the panel, maybe to do one round with your closing statement, so to speak. The question is, we're coming towards the end of this year. We're starting to look forward to next year, right? Of course, we would all like to know what are the tangible next steps that we could do. And there's another question in the chat that asks, what are the most important challenges that can be addressed specifically by development partners, right? So as we start thinking about plans and initiatives and whatever we would like to support going forward, would you mind sharing your sort of top recommendations for how development partners can support entrepreneurs next year? Thank you. Let me start with Nuria.
Thank you. So, well, I think I'm just gonna repeat my message at the beginning in case it wasn't clear. I think if I could choose like one thing that development partners should focus on is really having this ecosystem approach, having a one place where everyone can know what's happening. We have the report, but it's good to keep it alive and for each country, and then also like building this pathway. So as an entrepreneur, where am I now? Where do I go? How do I start? As Sia mentioned, if I have a computer and my house, what else do I need? Who else can like support me when I'm like there just like starting, or maybe when I'm a little bit more advanced in my journey, but who do I go to? So I think those two could be like a good starting point.
Thank you, Nuria. Jay?
I think I'm probably along the same lines for our development partners would be to support the ESOs. So as a chamber, we got support from DFAT, and that really enabled us to do our advocacy work. And thank you, DFAT. And we established the Ecosys, which is the Young Entrepreneurs Council of Solomon Islands with help from ILO. And the Ecosys is focused on specifically on young entrepreneurs. So I think continuing that support, which, you know, leads into added services, a one-stop shop, as being raised earlier, I think would probably be where I would suggest best support.
Thank you, Jay. Sia, what would you like to see next year?
Thank you. I think I would support that, but I also would suggest or recommend to the key development partners that there's, you know, more than one way to reach individual businesses. Sometimes there is a channel that they're used to, and they go through that same channel. And sometimes when the middleman or the middle organization is problematic, the help doesn't come through to the people who need it most. And there's also the opportunity to diversify their contacts in the region and not, you know, be used to people who've been in business for at least 20 years or just people in the tourism sector who are suffering. There are opportunities for them not only in a one-stop shop, but also in really reaching directly to the people who are the entrepreneurs. And also for Tonga, there's a high percentage. Most of our entrepreneurs are informal. And that says a lot, because if they're not formalized or registered, then so much of the help doesn't get through to all those people, especially to the young people. So there's room for creativity, there's room for diversity, and also in the communication, the way the funding availability is communicated. So many of us sometimes wonder, you know, do they only inform us a week before, or is, you know, can we be informed at least a month before of this, so we can prepare and make time and all that? So that's just what I want to add on. Thank you.
No, thank you so much, Sia. Sagufta, what would you like to share?
Thank you. Yeah, agreeing with all of the above points raised by the other panelists. Just another thing is, I feel like the support needs to be decentralized. Usually it's predominantly in one location, where it's a city center or a, you know, say for Fiji, most of the support comes to, say, Suva city. But we forget about the smaller islands, the rural communities that really need that level of access and support. So I think that's one of the things that needs to be definitely looked into. And the second thing is that now is the time that we really need to build capacity around digital literacy. And if that, I think, Nuria, in the report, it was mentioned around digital programs and access to digital literacy, because it's such a rapidly growing digital economy that we have access to. It's really going to be good to be able to tap into that market. Our infrastructure here in Fiji, because we are now diversifying from just being in the tourism industry to other industries like the ICT and the BPO industry specifically, it shows that our infrastructure is good and it's supported, and we can definitely tap into these markets, but there needs to be a certain level of capacity and investment in, you know, in sort of creating more spaces for these kind of opportunities. So yeah, those are the two things I think I would definitely recommend.
Thank you so much, Sagufta. And again, you're raising some very important points. Everyone has raised very important points, and it's no coincidence that, last but not least, I'd like to hand the floor to Cameron.
Thank you, Zoe. I've been taking notes furiously, but no, it's always good to have these discussions and like hear it from the horse's mouth in terms of what's going on. And I think we need to keep doing that, something that I strive to do. So thank you again, Zoe, for coordinating this meeting today. But from my point of view, the kind of two takeaways from me, and I agree with what the other panelists have said, but this idea of a one-stop shop, very supportive of that. But from a development partner point of view, you know, often support and interventions in country are so projectized, right? And we all come to this in different ways, and often it's not the issue of that there isn't support, but there's so many different options and no one knows what they are. So Nuri, I'm very supportive of the idea of stronger kind of coordination and harmonisation between development partners, and Australia is one of the bigger donors in the region. I'm striving to get better at that. And the second point I really wanted to focus on is that locally led. So Sagufta, going to your point around, you know, often this is concentrated in either a capital city or even a regional city in the case of Suva or other countries, other cities in the Pacific. And, you know, in order to reach those micro and small entrepreneurs, people who are just starting out, I think we really need to contextualize our understanding of the operating environment through kind of locally led and expert, like not even expert, but kind of a feedback loop through a local discussion, a local discourse, to understand what those constraints are and understand if what we're trying to do as development partners is actually working in the context we're talking about. So those are the two key points for me: harmonization and locally led all the way. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Cameron. If I can attempt to make a quick summary, right, of the discussion that we've had here with the panelists, and also not forgetting some of the excellent observations, questions, comments that have come through the chat and the Q&A. Unfortunately, we have just an hour and we can't really dive into every single thing. There's much more to be explored. But clearly what's needed is, in a way, it's systems change we're talking about, right? So a change in mindset, a change in support systems, a change in appreciation of what is valuable, right? And those are complex issues to change. They take a lot of time, a lot of effort, sometimes also a lot of money to address, right? That is something that we have to recognize first and foremost. Secondly, I think we have to be aware that, yes, we have a development partner supporting a lot of initiatives in the region, and there's a lot of things, partnerships and support that can be offered through that. Also, we have to be aware of the grassroots, different ways of doing things, right? Grassroots-led, different pathways, different ways of communicating, being open-minded to what entrepreneurship might even look like, right? And let's not forget the government. Government is, of course, a foundational pillar to play a facilitating role, both in terms of infrastructure, in terms of legislation, and supporting access to financial products. So it seems that we sort of have our work cut out for us in a big way, right? I really look forward to hearing from more of you. I look forward to responding to some of the comments that I've seen that I haven't had the chance to respond to right here, right now. Immediate next steps, I would like to welcome you all to connect with us next week when we launch UNCDF's Pacific Digital Economy Program. There we will also be exploring some of the work in this area that we are going to do, and we would love to continue the conversation there. That's happening next week. Beyond that, I just want to thank everyone for sharing so openly and so honestly and bringing out some of these really important matters. Thank you to the entire panel for being here today, and a thank you for all of you in the chat who are on the other side, silent participants, for also thinking, listening, and contributing. And with that, we've come to the end of the innovation webinar. So I wish you all an excellent afternoon and evening, and until we meet again. Thank you.